I'm not as focused with Hawkeye as Jared is. I'm more focused with David and Glenn. I have a handout that Professor Acap is handing out right now for the close. Please feel free to.
Move the extras back here, Susan, so that folks can grab as they leave.
I also did my paper on the last Mohicans. I have a little bit of a summary as well. I will just reiterate it. Written in 1826 by James Fenimore Cooper, The Last of the Mohicans is set in 1757 in the forests of Upper New York. The story follows the brave woodsman Hawkeye and his loyal Mohican friends as they become involved within the bloody battles of the French and Indian War. The abduction of the general's daughters by hostile savages, the deceit of the traitor Magua, and the exciting events that lead to the final tragic confrontation between rival war parties creates an unforgettable picture of life on the frontier. As the idyllic wilderness gives way to the forces of civilization, Cooper matches the distinction within the gender roles he assigns to his characters. While Matthew Kniff, in his criticism, Cooper's heroic David Gamut, addresses the instability of the masculine category in Cooper's The Last of the Mohicans, he overlooks the importance of the feminine category. He compares David and Hawkeye and discusses their traits with regard to body and mentality. He concludes that, while both masculinities deviate from the norm, they are cohesive, if not a necessity for cultural progress. At the same time, David and Cora contrast drastically through the same measure used to depict David and Hawkeye. Throughout the next 10 minutes, I want you to ponder two questions. What do we make of David and his role in society? And more so, what does Cooper seem to suggest about cultural assumptions through his inclusion of David within his work? Cooper, it seems, is ahead of his time in his distinctions between sex and gender, while he makes most evident in David and Cora. According to William Eastwood, a former anthropology professor here at Oakland, sex is defined as the anatomical and genetic differences between individuals. Gender, on the other hand, asserts the values, expectations, and roles that society assigns to sexes. America's gender ideology, the meanings and values that we attach to manhood and womanhood, changes over time and differ from place to place. Frequently criticized for creating ordinary characters, Cooper utilizes the physical and mental characteristics of Hawkeye and Cora to reveal the differences of sex and gender explicitly within David. David Gamut is first presented in the novel as an ungainly man whose outward appearance reveals an inner awkwardness and inappropriateness for the frontier. Applying the 18th century notions of sensibility, we can see that Cooper draws upon physiognomy as a convention to convey Gamut's awkwardness. According to the Dictionary of Sensibility, a reader can interpret a character's personality based upon his or her physical appearance. The body comes to a central site of meaning, one on which language more eloquent than words is thought to be inscribed. Descriptions of dress, physical features, including hair and facial expressions, are a whole sign system for deciphering the internal qualities of the individual. The following passage describes Gamut's physical appearance. Please feel free to follow along on your handout if you'd like. And it's similar to what Jared has talked about already. He had all the bones and joints of other men, without any other proportions. Erect, his stature surpassed that of his fellows. Seated, he appeared reduced within the ordinary limits of the race. The same contrarily in his members seemed to exist throughout the whole of the man. His head was large, his shoulders narrow, his arms long and dangling, while his hands were small, if not delicate. His legs and thighs were thin, nearly to emaciation, but of extraordinary length. And his knees would have been considered tremendous had they not been outdone by the broader foundations on which this false superstructure of the blended human orders was so profanely reared. The ill-assorted and injudicious attire of the individual only serve to render his awkwardness more conspicuous. During this first meeting with Gamut, the other characters are able to observe that his long, lengthy proportions and delicate hands set him apart from the other men. Cooper paints Gamut's physical awkwardness as a distinct indicator that, while Gamut does possess all the bones and joints of other men, he does so without any other proportions that would qualify him as manly. Visually, we see Gamut's weakness with the description of his legs and thighs, which Cooper details as thin, nearly to emaciation. Cooper not only implies that Gamut is unmanly, but also suggests that his physical awkwardness contributes to an effeminate physical weakness that is uncharacteristic of other men, especially the frontier male. While Knipp suggests deferring gender roles within the same sex attends to the progress of American culture, David Greven's criticism could not have a more opposing observation. Instead of differences uniting people, Greven explores a homosocial brotherhood men share, which excludes anything that exists outside of it. Greven states that gender behavior can be seen as a rhetorical act that keeps arguing itself out in an attempt to clarify its own dynamics. Positive appeals to masculinist aggression or mutual brotherhood, for example, are regularly aligned with ongoing psychological anxieties that if a man is not correctly masculine, then he must be something else. The most encompassing negative appeal is the association with the feminine, and American cultural myths draw heavily and continuously on the desires and fears that surround the resulting stereotypes. In this instance, the association with the feminine, or the typical gender role of the female, is negative. In his article, Matthew Knipp instead addresses the compromised masculinities of Hawkeye and David. Cooper's The Last of the Mohicans is set in the frontier. Within the natural frontier setting, there are no set gender assignments. Gender is culturally defined ideology conceived within a society, not in nature. Knipp notes in his article, Cooper's Heroic David Gamut, that critics have accused Cooper of sensationalism and cliché, of creating stock characters, of reducing complexity and ambiguity to simple and satisfying formulae. Knipp defies these accusations through his analyzation of Hawkeye and David by saying the critical comments surrounding Cooper as creating stock characters can be further argued through the characterization of Cora. Women's roles during this time period were much more rigidly defined than they are today. This shared ideology prevalent throughout the nation is exemplified through Major Duncan Hayward's escorting of Colonel Monroe's daughters, Cora and Alice. This act of guiding illustrates the assumption that women are the weaker sex. While Cooper assigns Alice the stereotype, his characterization of Cora does little to support that notion. He displays Cora's courageousness, for example, when she tells the men to leave and get help when they run out of gunpowder, fully aware she greatly increased her chances of being captured. When Magua presents her with the ultimatum of becoming his wife or falling victim to his knife, she remains resolute. Interestingly enough, Cora is humble enough to beg on her knees and stretched her arms towards heaven, saying in a meek and yet confiding voice, "I am thine, do with me as thou seest best." This proclamation to the heavens embodies Cora as an antebellum tradition of Christ-like martyrs. Magua, portrayed as having no qualms in killing women and children, cannot kill Cora. "Woman," repeated Magua hoarsely, and endeavoring in vain to catch a glance from her serene and beaming eye, "choose." Magua is torn between having sympathy for feminine virtues and his savage values. It is interesting to note that the woman possessing such feminine virtues, Cora, brings a villainous man to a state of sympathy through the event of sparing her life. It is Cora's virtue that inspires a sympathetic response within Magua. It was through the careful analyzation of Knipp's article that I realized just how pivotal David's traits were regarding the rescue mission. He states that the singer possesses both extraordinary courage and a proficiency of his own. Cooper develops an unconventional heroic figure within David. He has the bones and joints of other men, but without any of their proportions. When I initially read this passage, I interpreted it as David being an extraordinary specimen. I didn't associate negativity with it, but instead construed positively a sense of individualism, someone who stood out. I was disappointed that Cooper went further to depict David as a false, whole man. Cooper himself defies the common stereotypes of the traditional gender roles throughout the novel. It is with that I entertain the idea that Cooper is aware of the preconceived notions of his reading audience. He, in fact, uses his audience's stereotypes of a true man's appearance and juxtaposes it to David's. In this way, Cooper is able to show readers the unexpected triumphs of David. The same can be said for Cora. In a contrasting way, Cooper reveals Cora as she concealed her charms from the gaze of the soldiery. Cooper attempts to mute the appearance of the woman Cora, who also possesses unexpected qualities within the realms of her gender. So here we have Cooper emphasizing exterior appearance to exemplify the traits of one character, David, while concurrently muting those of another to achieve the same exemplification of unexpected traits. Knipp describes David's religious enthusiasm, musical profession, and his eccentric behavior as seemingly compromising his masculinity. In a similar way, the religious element of David's occupation makes him less of a stereotype. According to Knipp, manliness was not as narrowly defined in the 19th century as it is today. He suggests the analysis of David today is harsher than it would have been in Cooper's era. If anything, Hawkeye's individualism would have been seen as more problematic. In present-day American society, we praise individualist ideas. So why do we analyze David more harshly? Why are the elements that compose manliness today so much more rigidly defined? One would presume an appreciation of individualism would constitute an appreciation for characters such as David. While the elements that make up manliness are more narrowly defined than they might have been in Cooper's era, America still does praise individuals who exist outside of the conformities. In a moment of doubt on Cora's part, she begs David to leave and rescue himself. Instead, he rises to the occasion. The entire event is marked with carefully chosen diction that connotes masculinity through sexual terms. He gazed for a moment, and his tall person grew more erect, while his chest heaved and every feature swelled, and seemed to speak with the power of the feelings by which he was governed. While Knipp suggests that this change in semantics mirrors a newfound potency within David, I entertain the notion that Cooper is employing the masculine features of David to their highest extent in an effort to redefine David's sexuality. By doing so, he manages to create more space between David's biological assignment as a man and the part he plays within society, typically casted by females. Matthew Knipp, in his analysis of The Last Mohicans, concludes that while alternative masculinities not only work together, their cooperation is fundamental for cultural progress. He proves this through a specific example found in the novel. Hawkeye and Gamut share the same stature. Hawkeye leads a song, and David trades his pipe for a slingshot. Knipp utilizes the concretion of a song, slingshot, and the human body as material objects connecting two unlike men. Similarly, he connects two unlike things, the male sex and female gender, within David. Cooper achieves contrast to Cora and David through the unconventional characterization of Cora as a courageous, reasoned woman. In this way, he contrasts the female sex with seemingly masculine gender traits. In addition to her and David's physical bodies contrasting greatly, their innate qualities diverge. Through Cora's death at the end of the novel, Cooper suggests that in antebellum America, there simply is no place for women who define gender roles. Women such as Cora threaten cultural norms. Through the careful craft of characters such as Hawkeye and Cora, Cooper is able to reveal commonly construed ideologies readers apply to sex and gender and apply how they contrast through these three distinct characters. David does not die at the end of the novel. Cooper does this deliberately to suggest non-threatening outliers like David do have place within antebellum America, so long as they are balanced by those who adhere to their sex and gender roles.